Hello, everybody. Drosco here from 10knorm.com, where my main focus is to help guide heart-centered entrepreneurs under 10K months to transcend the blind spots that are keeping them from thinking, feeling, acting, and authentically marketing so they can normalize their own versions of 10K months. And on today's episode, we have a little bit of a change up to the normal scheduled programming. Instead of our usual real talk segment, we're going to actually have an expert talk segment where I bring in somebody who not only has hit the 10K per month milestone, but is also heart-set entrepreneurs doing good things in the world. And they're here to share their wisdom with us on what it takes, their journey to get there, and all the other good stuff that goes along with that. So our expert today is Casey Edward, who is a certified life coach who now focuses on mindfulness for small businesses and corporations. And in addition to that, she also runs the I Can't Wait to Tell You podcast, where she dives deep into meditation, manifestation, science, woo, sex, relationships, money, and everything in between. And what I really liked when I was kind of getting ready for this is the whole element, the thing that Casey's rooted into is that your spiritual journey just got real. And she defines that as fun, legit, verified, and explained. So what I really like with that message, and the one that she stresses in her podcast, that it's all about, like, it's time to leave behind the anxiety, and along with it, all the people, the places, and all the things that no longer light you up. And the message certainly I resonate with is that, like, you are meant to live the life you desired, and you are also the ones that get to create it. And that's what we're going to dive into, along with all of the usual programming around 10K norms. So without further ado, Casey, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Drasco. I am so well. I am so excited.
Likewise. And I knew this was going to be a good podcast when, before we started recording, you asked if you could swear. And I was like, yeah, if this goes into pirate territory, I know we're going to have a good time. So yes, but by all means, whatever comes up is what needs to come up. So I'm all for that. Yeah, so I'd love to dive into, like, your story and, how do you go from life coach to successful podcast to doing all the things that you do? Like, break it down for us.
Yeah. So my story begins with in my 20s, I had all of the external things that you would want to fall into place. I had a relationship, I had a job I enjoyed, I was living with my friends in the city, I was getting into running, I was fit. And so on paper, everything should have been making me extremely happy. And yet I always kind of had mild anxiety, I would say, just hyper awareness of people, what people were thinking of me, or just never feeling safe in my reality. And then I don't know when it turned, but when I was probably 23 or 24, it turned into almost being debilitating. So, I seemed like this happy, extroverted person to people in my life, and yet I felt like I was crumpling inside. And so I was confused because, I had all of the things that sometimes we tell ourselves are going to be the catalysts to happiness. And yet there I was, just struggling to get out of bed sometimes. And so I remember hearing about meditation and being like, honestly, that sounds fucking horrible because I don't even like being with myself when I'm doing things. So let alone sitting alone in silence, like absolutely not. And it just kept coming into my awareness. And I was like, okay, you know what? I'll just read about it, see if I can get into the flow of it. So I read 10% Happier by Dan Harris. And he made it very normal. It took away so much of the spiritualness, and I wasn't very spiritual at the time. And it was just like, it just helps me. I'm a news anchor and I'm a very successful person, but it helps me not have panic attacks. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to try this. And so I will never forget, I sat for the first 5 minutes and I had no idea what happened, but something in me just felt like it shifted a little. And from there, I remember hearing my intuition for the first time. And I know that's super out there, but I'm standing in the kitchen. I was a nanny at the time. I'm eating lunch and I just hear yoga teacher training. And I kid you not, I just kind of look up and was like, what? And I didn't do yoga at the time. Like I said, I was running. Yoga was too slow and too spiritual for me, but I couldn't help but just sit down and I looked into it. And then before I knew it, I had taken out a credit card and was signed up for yoga teacher training and life coaching certification at once. And that was kind of the start and the opening of a can of worms of learning about not only meditation and yoga and the breath, but also mindset and how our thoughts really do dictate how we're feeling and what's created in our lives. And I just felt like if just one person at some point in my life had said to me, "You are not your thoughts," I would have been so much better off. I played college soccer and no coaches ever talked to me about mindset. It was just all about the practicing and the showing up and the fitness. And, you have class upon class about psychology, and I did social work and counseling. And I don't ever remember someone talking about my emotions or my mind. And that's when I started learning about quantum physics. And basically, long story short, that's when I was like, okay, more people need to know about this, especially if they have anxiety or anything like that.
I mean, there's so many different areas that we can go into for that. So, thank you for such a rich intro. So what I figured is, I was kind of like taking mental notes and like physical notes while you were talking. And I just figured, okay, let me like throw things back at you that kind of stood out. And then, we'll riff and see kind of where it goes. So are you cool with that?
Perfect.
Awesome. So the first one was like when you spoke about, so I had all this anxiety. It was first kind of this little lingering thing. I just noticed I was, very attuned to everybody, but then that attunement grew into something that was rather debilitating. And then when, I don't know if you want to call it the answer, but when one of the potential solutions was presented to me of like, just sit quieter with it, the visual I had, and I've experienced certainly, and even the clients that I do, like this is a crux of what we do. It's like, hey, that thing like that you don't really want to like hear, like why not just turn up the volume on it? So like, but by sitting silently, right? That's usually the reaction that we have. And and I would like take your take on this, but one of the exercises that we have in a 10K norm program, because it kind of is rooted first and starting with emotional management, right? Like before we get to what Instagram thing should I post, like let's get with you being able to tolerate the emotions that come up that stop you from doing it, right? Very similar to your anxiety bit. And one of the exercises that I have them there, because I don't necessarily care if you meditate or you have your own process or you pray or like whatever it is that your connection to something higher is. But the first exercise to start that off is to do nothing, like literally just sit and do nothing with your eyes open, so that you can begin to practice that muscle of tolerating what is. So I would just love your viewpoint on that piece.
Yeah, I think that doing nothing seems so counterintuitive and counterproductive to the hustle that we're very accustomed to, or the hustle that we equate to success. And so I think that was part of what was breaking my camel's back, was feeling like I was never doing enough. So not only, like I said, did I have this hyper awareness of what people thought of me, I then began to take on, I have to do all of the things all of the time, meaning my mind was just go, go, go. And then these emotions, I was not addressing them at all. I had no way to assimilate them. And so when you can sit and do nothing, it allows you, first and foremost, it allows you to be the witness, right? It allows you to observe, okay, I watched this thought go by of, I am so stressed out, I'll never get this done. And I have the ability to say, is that true? No, not necessarily. I might be able to. And when you have the moment of understanding that you can have the discernment of if you want to choose the thoughts and the emotions you're having, that is everything. Because then, like, all the times where you sit down and you have work to do, or you're trying to hit that next goal or that next milestone, and the mind is like, I don't want to. You're like, we do. We do. But yeah, I think there's something to be said about being able to harness our emotions. And I'm not saying push them away, but be with them. Because what this also brings up is, some people think that when you meditate or when you sit in silence, it's just going to be Zen. You're going to wake up from it or come out of it and you're going to be like, I feel so clear. I'm going to write this next book. I feel great. That's just all that's going to happen. That's what I thought. But what happens is shit starts to hit the fan, in that a lot of emotions that were holding you back without knowing it will come up. and you can see them, you feel them, and then it's kind of like these barriers fall away from you, like physically, spiritually, emotionally, and then things get easier. So the next step becomes more clear, or taking the action that you've been putting off by scrolling Instagram becomes easier to do. So yeah, I think there's a lot to be said about sitting in stillness with your emotions. Again, it sounds horrible to start, but it is really intrinsic to being successful in any area of your life.
100%. I mean, I couldn't agree more from the vantage point of like what I need to do right now to move forward and implement the business things that I know or I feel like I should do. Um, to like in my previous life, so I owned a brick and mortar weight loss center, and then we dealt with a lot of emotional eating issues, and at the crux of it is, can I fight the urgency, so the urge in the urgency to not eat the Oreo and then to take a better action step, right? So 100%, I agree with you on that. And one of the other things I want to get your take on is one of the things in my journey that I found, and the reason why I chose, instead of like meditation, I chose the exercise of like do nothing with your eyes open for 10 minutes, was sometimes when people do, and okay, I'm projecting here, like sometimes when I did meditation, what I found was that it was just another way to not do what you just described, right? Like I got to the point where like I could meditate for 45 minutes, an hour, but nothing would actually be addressed. Like it was, instead of zoning out to Netflix, I was zoning out to my own silence. So the end effect was exactly the same as the previous bit. Now, can that happen when you do nothing with your eyes open? Certainly. I just found that for me and for the people that I coached, there's less of a likelihood when your eyes are open, because there's a sentiment of like I'm still here, I'm still alive, I'm still conscious, versus like you go into that frame of like, yeah, I should just like zen out and go to another dimension, or whatever the thing might be. So curious to see your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think that they're totally different. So, like you said, so meditation is often something that I do because, and I'll get to how they connect, but in the morning I do it because when I can clear the urgent thoughts, like we wake up and then immediately the mind starts going, like you have this to do, this to do, you got to work out, you got to have your coffee, blah, blah, blah. And when I can silence those, then it makes my day far more fluid because the clarity of what to do that day comes in. So sure, I have some basic guidelines of what's going on, but meditation helps me hone in on what is going to make me feel good that day, and also just puts me into a vibration of that. And then what you said for the sitting in silence with your eyes open, I think that the word that you used, urgency, is the word to hone in on for this, because our mind, our ego, our personalities, whatever you want to call that aspect of our time limited on this earth, not our soul, it knows that it's only got a certain amount of time. And it's also been taught like, okay, we've got to do all the things. Like I said, all of the things all at once, the hustle, the grind. But your purpose and your journey and the steps you're going to take are on no timeline. So if you're feeling like you have to do something urgently, that's the time to sit back and take those 10 minutes. And I think that that's so powerful, because when you take those minutes, you're like, okay, there's nothing serious going on here. I just happen to have some work that I'm going to do, but it's not that urgent, like, oh my God, I'm going to do things just for the sake of doing things. And then again, it brings you into that clear, fluid action taking from a place of inspiration, rather than, oh, I was going to do all of those things just to say I did them. And someone was actually telling me recently about a success orientation they went to. And the whole talk was on how there's a lot of people staying busy, but there's not a lot of people being super successful at what they do. And, again, not to say that there aren't a lot of successful people, but are we doing busy work, or are we taking those 10 minutes to chill out and then go into the things that feel inspired? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of the Zen quote, and I've used it on this podcast before, where, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it's like the person or whoever goes to like the Zen master, and it's like, hey, like, what do I do to like calm myself down and pretty much do exactly what you just described. He's like, well, just, take the time and meditate for 20 minutes. Like 20 minutes. Like I'm so crazy busy, like running around everywhere doing everything. Where can I find 20 minutes? He's like, yeah, you're right. You should probably take 2 hours, you know?
Yes. I love that
Like
one.
it sounds so like counterintuitive, but it's exactly at the heart of what you just described, which is this sentiment of, am I choosing to do more, right? Because that's where our primal brain defaults to, right? It is defaulted in safety and scarcity. So how do you ensure you don't have scarcity? Well, you do more, right? Or you get more, right?
Yeah.
So our default is always to chase more in whatever capacity it comes, right? But then it doesn't actually answer the question of, is that getting us closer to what we want? We might have even defined what it is that we want. And one small step towards where we want to go is way more efficient than a whole lot of steps devoted to just doing more, right? It's kind of that sentiment of, I'm covering a lot of distance, but not really going anywhere, right? Like one step in the right direction is bigger than circling in, 10 times in the same circle. So yeah, I completely, agree with that sentiment. So just before I go on to like the other stuff, how does like any points of view, etc., on that piece?
Yeah, I think that the thing that I would want to touch on with that too is because, and this is going to be such a big part of our conversation, I'm sure, but there are lots of ways to make money and to be successful. And what I found is a lot of the time on my journey, I was doing that busy work that we talked about. I was taking more jobs on, I was doing more things, I was checking all of the boxes, but I wasn't checking in emotionally. And when I started to check in emotionally, I was like, okay, I'm making the money and things are quote unquote going well, but I feel very anxious and very agitated. And so when we can start to recognize how we feel emotionally about the things we're doing, that's going to be the key to ultimately our long-term success. Because again, like you said, one small step in the right direction, aka in the direction of like where our soul and our purpose is going, is so much better than 100 random steps that are doing things that aren't lighting you up or aren't making you feel grounded and good in what you're doing. So yeah, I would say that when you slow down, it allows you to check in with how you're feeling and then go into what's going to actually truly help you.
Right, like where the thing that you're searching for, you
Mhm.
have the space to find the clarity to actually find it. So take the step towards that.
Yeah.
100%. The other part that I wanted to touch on, because you mentioned it even when you started, was I had done all this training. I was in sports. I had all these coaches. I had all this work. I was constantly doing stuff, but nobody ever talked to me about mindset. And I'd love to dive into kind of how you see mindset. So yeah, let's just start with that, and then we can riff off of that.
Yeah. So, first and foremost, I like to say that when we get into mindset and we talk about it very casually, I know that it's far more deep than our surface level conversation might be about it, because mindset is going to be different for everyone. So like I said, when I started meditating, a lot came up. And so everything that we'll talk about mindset wise, yes, changing our thoughts and creating our realities is a huge piece of it. And just know that things are going to come up that you'll emotionally have to deal with, and that's okay too. So how I talk about it is, some people are like, well, how do you know when it's time to like really emotionally dive into something, or when you just have to change your thought? And I'm like, well, the first easiest way is if you're sitting at your work at desk, that's not going to be the time to find your inner child and see why they're upset. So if you're at work, that's the time where you're just going to take the time to recognize what's going on in your mind. Whereas if you're at home and you've got a little extra time and you're feeling off, that might be the time to delve into it. So there's this fine balance of mindset in the day and just passing and starting to like make your brain and your neural network stronger and more inept to like what you want, like making it so that it's thinking about what you want. And also there's going to be emotional work. So I just want to say that, because sometimes when people are like, I just changed my mindset and I thought positive thoughts, and I'm like, I had anxiety for 15 years. That sounds way too easy. So aside from the emotional work, what I started to learn was that your thoughts create your reality. So, like we were alluding to, I could sit around all day and be like, this is never going to work. I can't be an entrepreneur. I need someone to help me. How am I going to show up? What are people thinking of me? And I could put all of my energy into that way of thinking. And thus, I'm going to take action or not take action because of that. So if I'm feeling like that, if I'm thinking thoughts like, I don't know if everyone's going to like me, I don't know if I can do this, what do you think the actions are going to be? It's not going to be much action, first of all. And it's going to be very trepidatious and very uncertain. And so when you're putting that energy out and that's where your thoughts are going, it's like this full circle journey of just not getting anywhere. Rather than, or in comparison to, if I wake up and I'm like, I am so grateful for this day and it's going to be the best day ever. I've got this. I can do this. I am making the money that I want to make. I'm supported by source, the universe, God. Everything is flowing for me. Money flows freely to me. Like, you can feel when you're saying these things, how different they feel. And in the second scenario, when you're saying these things and you're thinking these thoughts, that's when, ooh, an idea will come. Oh, I should reach out to that new client. Ooh, I should start this new venture. And so we can create emotions and we can create realities and actions based on what we're allowing to be in our mind. And the best way to think about it is, are you ruling your mind and using it as a tool, or are you letting it rule you? And for a really long time, I didn't know that I wasn't my mind. Like I said, I had no idea that I could watch the thoughts and then change them. So when you know that, something that I have my clients do is at the end of the day, I'll have them make 2 columns. And it's thoughts that are aligned with my highest self and my highest actions, and thoughts that are out of fear and lack. And they write them down. And when you can start to get to know them, then it's much easier to be like, ooh, that thought's not going to serve me. And I don't need that right now. What's a small, better feeling thought that I can think? And, this opens the gate to manifestation and quantum physics and energy. But like, just starting off with the basics, what are the thoughts you're allowing to be your reality? Because it's going to create your external reality.
I mean, 200%, right? Again, so many riffs, etc. Okay, so I think the number one thing that I would reflect back and kind of just throw back your way. One of the things you mentioned was, okay, so there's like the emotional component, and then there's like the thought component, and there is a default component that gets you to repeat whatever comes up if you don't consciously choose it, right? Like if you want the best evidence of like what's coming, like look what happened yesterday, right? Like that kind of sentiment. And one thing that changed the game for me to kind of put those pieces together, I don't know if you've ever heard of Dr. Jeff Spencer, who's basically like a performance coach, and he's worked with like Tiger Woods and all these other like big athletes and performers and things like that. But he has this sentiment of the human mindset versus the champion's mind. And one of the things in that he really broke it down for me, or I guess put the pieces together, was that primal self, right? The part that we're hardwired into. So he called that the human mindset because it's like set. So it's hardwired. But it's like that piece, usually the piece that is rooted in like scarcity and safety, and generally is the one that produces the anxiety. Like that part goes first, 100% of the time, every time. Why? Because when it comes to safety, like we don't want to be thinking like, hey, how do I like fall? Like you just want to react and you fall properly. There's a loud sound. I don't want to be like, well, what was the pitch of that sound? Like, was it an animal? Was it not? Like, you just want to like move out of the way. So that piece is hardwired to go first. So this whole sentiment of like feeling guilty and bad about feeling bad and guilty and these emotional do moves that we drive ourselves into, it was so freeing to know that, okay, that part of me goes first, but the higher part of me, that in my definition is the container for, spirit and your higher self and also your higher cognition, that part, its power is that it has veto, right? Like it gets last say, it gets final say on what actually happens. So we can get scared, but then we can veto that. And it's just our ability to execute that power. So I call that, like, we have the power of the observer, like you said, to sit back and to actually be able to witness these things, thoughts included. And the other power is the power of choice. So in all of those instances, we have the power of choice to either veto or accept. right? So to me, when you were speaking, it was like there was this whole exploration of really like those qualities, and also not getting bogged down in that sentiment that that primal self is going to go first, is going to want to try and take over only 100% of the time, unless we get better at this other sentiment. So again, before I go on, I'd love to have your point of view on that.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm gonna have to look into that book. You said it was a book by
I
him?
don't think he has a book. You can just look him up, Dr. Jeff Spencer. I think
Okay.
High Performance on Tap, I think might be the like mini course, but I can send you those links after this recording.
Okay. Yeah, I love that. Yeah. So for that, I would say that when that mindset is going to come first, like you said, that primal mindset, I have found that the best way to stop putting stake or stock into that is by taking less seriously. So what happens when that mindset hits in is it feels very serious. And like you said, it's fight or flight, it's survival. And so you start this entrepreneurial journey and you hear that mindset say, you're never going to make it. And you're like, oh my God, is that true? Like you start freaking out, or you feel sad, or you feel bad. And when I've, now when that part of me comes out, like you expect it and it's coming out, I kind of just watch and then I'm like, are you done? Right? Like I like talk to myself, like, are you done? Because that takes so much of the anxiety and the stress away, because that ego or that mindset is so serious. Again, it's like that survival. And, we're not being chased after tigers. So for us now, it's survival mindset is around what others think and if we succeed or not. Realistically, those are two of the biggest things that we face on a daily basis. So when we can lighten it up, like when I have clients who have anxiety, but they're starting their own business, I'm like, start to question it, start to loosen it up. Like sometimes my mind will say something as I'm about to dive into work, and out loud, I'm like, absolutely not. Like out loud, just call it out, like acknowledge it, because if you just kind of keep trying to like shut it up or put it down, it's just going to overflow. So I acknowledge it, I'll question it, I'll take the severity out of it. And then that's when I can kind of move into my normal success thoughts, the thoughts that feel good, because I have emotionally shifted. So that's what I would say about shifting from those two mindsets.
Yeah, 100%, right? Because it is, I think it is a real part of us, right?
Yeah.
Like it's like I do not believe that, we need to believe that
Yeah.
we're like separate from our ego. Like our egos, in my opinion, is like what gives this avatar, like this allows us to do what we're doing right now. So I don't believe that's a part to shun. And the definition of ego that always resonated the most with me is from Byron Katie, and I use her work quite a bit. But she just says like the ego is everything I believe. And to me, that was like very simple, because it's like, okay, if I believe that the universe is fundamentally friendly, cool. Like I don't have, there's nothing for me to really like. I like believing that. It makes me feel good to believe that, and like off we go.
Yeah.
Right. But if I believe that the universe isn't friendly and people are out to get me, that doesn't make me feel good. It doesn't really have a lot of like, good ways that I'm going, like good results aren't likely to lead from that belief. So my ego, and I can call that my thinking, I can call that my thoughts, I can call that my narrative, my story. That story, which is rooted in safety, is likely to again go first, right? Because that's the part that's triggered. So it's going to hijack that part of my story. But it's like, I can shun that no matter what. There will just be another story that replaces it. So I don't believe that we need to get rid of the ego, but it's like you said, how do I invite that in? Be like, listen, like we don't need that right now. Like here we are. It's not really serving us. Like let's go in this direction. So to me, that makes a lot of sense. I'm so glad that you shared that piece. And the other part that I would just like to riff off of is, so you mentioned this idea of like new thought, right? Like what's a better thought that's serving me? And that's definitely something we use in our programs as well. And the tricky part that I find happens with that is like, like Abraham Hicks often talks about the like the cork, right? Like are you pushing the cork down and creating resistance? Or are you just letting it flow and allowing things to come in, right?
Yeah.
And I've always liked that sentiment of like manifestation. And one of the ways that it connected that piece with what I was just talking about previously, with regards to like new thought, is I think a lot of us will kind of force the new thought to like force ourselves feeling good. And I always liken that to like, let me take the cork and pull it up to the surface and keeping it there by all these like good positive thoughts. Like eventually you're gonna run out of energy and it's just gonna like drop back down to where its original baseline was. So I was just curious, A, how that lands, and B, how you deal with that both with yourself and with clients.
Yeah, so I found that for myself in the beginning because when I learned about positive thinking and affirmations, I started writing, I'm a millionaire, and I was nowhere close to making a lot of money. So I'm writing, I'm a millionaire, and all of these things. And like you said, there was just such a big dissonance that my brain and my personality couldn't understand. There was too big of a gap. So what I started to recognize is having a bridge statement. So sure, maybe you want to be a millionaire, but say you start off pretty broke. You just started a business and you're like, oh boy, I want to be a millionaire. You can't go from broke to a millionaire. So what I started saying is money is coming to me more readily. Money is flowing to me easier. Like you have to have these statements that bring you to a neutral place if you're kind of at the bottom. So a good example would be I had a client who was coming out of some serious health issues and her body was starting to physically get better, but she had all of the emotional trauma and all of the psyche of someone who had serious health problems, chronic illness. And so she was like, I don't know where to go. And I was like, instead of going from where you are to I am healed, you could say, I am healing. I heal a little bit more every day. Something that feels at least slightly feasible. Like, can you emotionally connect to it? So I couldn't emotionally connect to a millionaire. It was too far away from where I was. So what can I connect to? What can I emotionally bridge myself with to get me to those bigger goals? Because I think that, Abraham and a lot of thought leaders talk about, how people say being realistic is gonna stop you from getting your dreams. But I think that there is a little bit of quote unquote reality needed, because the brain will just go error does not compute. Like that can't even. But if you're like, I'm starting to make more money than ever before, that feels in the general direction and that feels believable. So I would say that the new thought, as long as it's something that you can emotionally connect with and that it's at least a little believable, you're like, ooh, okay, that does feel like I could believe that. And it's better than the last place. I think that that's the important thing to notice is, again, small steps. You don't have to quantum leap everything. You can just take small steps in the right direction, think a little bit differently, and that really will take you to the next level.
Yeah, just moving the needle forward slightly,
Yes.
and then little by little by little, and you look back and it's like, okay, I've already moved like
Yeah.
quite a bit.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, totally agree on all ends. It's actually a very similar approach to what we use as well. And one of the things that I wanted to bring up in addition to that is, so what do you do when you're in those instances where it's like, man, like screw the believable thought, screw the like big thought, like just screw everything. Like I just like there's, what are you talking about? Like being a millionaire, like all I want to do is like pay off my debt. Everywhere I look, it's like I have bills. Like, you know, I'm trying, but it's not working. Like, how do you navigate those instances?
If I'm really emotionally struggling in one of those situations or like outbursts, like we've all had those moments where you're just kind of like freaking out. Like I have ultimatum to the universe so many times because I've been like, I just want to pay this off. I've been working so hard. Where is it? Like whatever. And when I'm in those human moments, I find I have to walk away from it completely. So if the topic at hand was money and I'm trying really hard and I'm attached to it and there's so much resistance, I have got to do something else. Like I have found that you can't think your way out of, once you've kind of gotten to that place, take a step away. And then once you feel better, then go back to it. So yeah, we do want the positive thoughts to start building, but when you're in a really strong contrast moment, as Abraham would say, I've found that you have to walk away from it and again come back to like this emotionally neutral place at least, so that way you can start to feel a little bit better. And something that I used to do was when I was having those moments, or if I was having a health problem, or if I was feeling anxious, I would try to figure out why. And that just gets you so much deeper into the rabbit hole. So instead of trying to figure out why or talking myself out of it, I just go for a walk. I watch a show. Again, it's so counterproductive, but I come out of like these high, fast brain waves that have me in fight or flight, come back down to earth. I let the resistance dissipate, and then I'll revisit it when I'm ready.
Right. So it's like the focus becomes, let's lower the charge
Yeah.
first instead of from that charge try to jump forward. Like it's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
And I love what you said about, okay, I try to figure my way through it. And, this was my wounding for so many years until I realized that, like, you really can't outthink emotions,
Yeah.
right? Like I got to the realization where I was like, okay, I'm really smart. And I always say on the podcast, like it's generally going to be your strengths that come your first distortions.
Yeah.
So what was happening is like I was having these emotional outbursts, I was having these pains, and I would quote unquote try and work through them by the same minds it was journaling oftentimes. But really what was just happening is like I was looking at everything through glass. Like, oh, here's disappointment, here's frustration, here's annoyance, here's depression, here's anxiety.
Yeah.
But it's like visiting the emotions from like at a zoo, right? Like you're just kind of looking at them from the outside, and it's like that's not what they want. Like they want the embodiment fully outside of the head, right? And I think that's so important that, and we have these conversations quite a bit where I'm like don't make a higher resolution problem, right? And
Yeah.
what I mean by that is if I draw the outline of a house,
Mhm.
it's like, okay, like everybody can recognize that it's a house, so we know that it's a house, so we can move on. But it's like, no, but I gotta like shade it, and I gotta put in windows, and I put in a door, and I gotta like draw in like a chimney, and it's like smoke coming out, and I gotta put a grass because you can't have a house. Like, I'm just making a higher resolution house when I knew like 10,000 like strokes before that it was already a house.
Yeah.
And I think we do that with our problems as well. It's like, no, but like I gotta go in deeper. I gotta like figure it out. Like you said, what if you just don't? Like, what if you actually just need to go outside and take a walk? And then now that you know it's a house, it's still manageable. You still work with it. So again, would love to know your take on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that what that comes down to is when you think about if it was an emotion that was coming up that you do eventually have to visit, think about when it's going to be the easiest to visit it. It's going to be when you're at least somewhat calm. So if a child is throwing a temper tantrum, you're not going to be like, it's okay, sweetie. Let's just talk this out. Well, how are you feeling right now? You're going to let them scream it out. And then once they're a little bit calm, you're going to be like, okay, we can't act like that. Or what made you feel like that? You'll have the discussion once they've come out of that. So again, even if you are going to try to figure out what was going on, either it's like sometimes it'll be that you were just having a moment and there's nothing deeper going on. But if you do feel like it's something going on, either way, taking a step away from it and then coming back to like the bare bones of it is going to be so much easier to navigate than going into the storm, because that's when it's just a shit show. So either way, taking a step back and then being like, okay, was that something deeper? And then you'll be like, yeah, what was going on there? Or no, I was just having a moment and I was feeling a little sassy. So yeah, either way, like having that outline and just going from the most basic emotional thing that's going on with it, that's going to be far easier to be able to deal with.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to the witness that you said before, right? Because the more you witness, the more you have the discernment of like, hey, am I just like acting up and being my 2-year-old self? Or is there something deeper that like I really need to honor and create the space and the time to actually like go and address? So yeah, 100% agree with that. And it is a skill, and it is something that takes development.
Mhm.
So what I'd love to segue into now is like, okay, so you have this vast array of knowledge, and obviously I can see why you teach mindfulness and with businesses who I think need it oh so often.
Yeah.
So what I'm curious to know now, just to kind of bring it back to the general theme of the 10K norm, is what do you find were kind of the big inflection points as far as creating your own 10K norm, and subsequently what do you see it with your clients, or what do you work on anywhere where that goes?
Yeah. So for me personally, I would say that what I've realized I was thinking about the show and I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about was, and I already touched upon this, but what I was doing for a really long time out of fear was, instead of doing the thing that I knew I was meant to do, I was doing things that I knew were going to be easy and I knew would make me money, instead of, and this is the big catalyst to taking your business to the next level, instead of focusing my energy on creating a belief that I can do it with what I want to be doing. So like just to say that again, I was doing things that I believed would make me money. So I would get these little side gigs like brick and mortar, or like go into a job, work at a gym. I knew that there would be a paycheck. Instead of focusing that energy on, and it takes a little more time and a lot more trust, instead of focusing that energy on making sure that I believe in myself. And so when I stopped doing all of those things, it eventually got to the point where I would apply to a new job and they'd be like, LOL, no. Like I would be so qualified and they'd be like, no. And the universe was like, stop, like, stop it. And so I realized, okay, this is going to be scary, because sitting down in my chair and meditating, or sitting down and really working with someone, I have a coach and I have someone who helps me. I think that we can all benefit from that, but that's not in that moment going to make me money. And so I had this idea that like, that's not productive. I need the money now. I want this money in my bank account. I want to see the however many figures, right? And so I really had to take a step back and say, okay, I am going to trust that in the next however long it takes to do this work, to set the foundation and the beliefs for a business that will make it there, I will be supported. I will be supported. Like I just had to kind of surrender, to use the word that a lot of people will start to be like, nothing was making sense other than to sit with myself and say, do I believe in me? Do I believe that I really can do this? And the answer was no, or else I would have been doing it, right? So I think that the best place to start once you have a business and you're about to hit the ground running is to first say, do I believe in this? Like, do I believe in myself? And you have to be honest with yourself, or you're going to find yourself 2 years in, like I was, working at a gym to supplement a business that wasn't making money because I didn't. So I would say that's the foundation, is everything we've been talking about. What are you thinking? And do you feel worthy? Yeah.
Love it. Okay, so if you're cool with it, I would love to get even more granular than
Yes.
that, because this comes up quite a bit.
Sure.
So I guess one avenue we'll continue down, which is this, like, okay, I'm starting a relatively new business, or it's not to the point yet that I can like quit my job. So as far as like, let's just say it's milestone 10K norm is concerned, it's somebody on the 0 to the low end.
Sure.
Okay? And I agree with you. It's usually comes down to some sort of, I don't believe I can have it, I'm unworthy, whether that's because I just believe it, or whether that's some sort of like early trauma thing, or things I've heard for a long time. Like it's secondary to like, this is happening right now. So if I'm somebody who's in that space, I've identified it, like I know I have blocks here, I don't really believe it, how do I actually overcome it?
Yeah. So that's a good point, where you don't have to quit your job out the gate. I did that and it was interesting. It was very difficult. So if you don't want to do that, looking back, I completely understand.
I would
So,
second that, just as a side note. Yeah, don't do it the way that we did it. Yeah.
like, I was like, wow, that was very brave of me, and I have no money now.
Yeah.
So, which is fine, but and that's something that I love with Abraham, is path of least resistance. So if you know that the path of least resistance is to have your job and start a business, I would say and you're like, okay, I have all of these blocks, then I would say, honestly, like, get your LLC, get all of your business stuff sorted, sure. And then have the work, like quote unquote, the Byron Katie work, or whatever work that you have to do, that's your work. So before you start getting the website, before you start marketing, before you hire a team, because you might have money to do all of those things, I would say to start the meditation, to start the stillness, to start getting to know yourself in an emotional way. And what I found was that for me, meditation helped. I've never been a big journaler. I wish I was. I just can't say that it ever worked for me. So for me, it was meditation. It was actively changing my mind every single day, where I would have timers go off at certain times of the day. And when it went off, I would be like, oh boy, how have I been thinking since the last timer went off, to check myself. And then I also had a coach, and then I got rapid transformational therapy. So I don't know if you've heard of that, but it helped me get into my subconscious. So my funds for a while were completely allocated to self work. And that is intrinsic with the business, but that's not what you'll learn often from the business or the marketing books. But I will say, have the job and work on yourself until you feel fucking ready to just take off. Like you are so in the know that nothing's going to stop you. Yeah.
I mean, I should have you do the promos for like the program and this, because that is at the core of my
Yeah.
message, and it's a big reason why I started 10K Norm, um, specifically for that, right? So I often use the sentiment of like we seldom have business problems as much as we have personal problems that show up in our business. And the reason that 10K Norm is set up the way that is, it's exactly what you just mentioned. It's like we're doing the thing, we got the business coaching, we bought the course, we're posting on Instagram, we're doing the things, but nothing's actually working. Why? Because we either have issues of self-regulation, so like we talked about at the beginning, like I freeze up when I'm supposed to post this authentic thing, or the thought of being authentic is like devastating, so I dilute my message, or I'm not even there yet because I'm crippled with anxiety, which then, distorts into like depression and I don't get anything done. So it's like, that's why the first 2 months of the program are managing your emotions, managing your thoughts, learning how to self-coach your way through it when it does come up, and then managing your focus so that you do the things you need to do consistently. At that point, we can talk about, we have evidence of all this, then we can talk about the marketing bit. So yeah, the fact that like, you resonate also with the fact of like, don't worry about the necessarily the business stuff. Get your stuff in order, have your money so you don't have that additional stress. But know that the work is in here much more. Like once that's in place, like the outside things kind of they don't take care of themselves, but they feel as if they take care of themselves. You still have to do them, obviously, right? But that is the core of the work. It looks very unsexy in comparison to what you'll see, advertised to you. But that is also why it is sexy once it hits, because then things are just flowing, right? So before I move on to the next piece, anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I think that also what this has taught me is that when you have the inner peace right, because that foundation is there within you, it doesn't matter what happens externally. So, say something whack happens and you have like a really crazy bad month out of nowhere, or like your computers crash and you have to get a new computer and you have to go, you have to put off clients for a month, or like whatever might happen, you never get rattled and you figure it out because you have done the inner work. So not only does this upfront help you, but this will help you time and time again, because the things that you're doing aren't necessarily what's creating the success. It's like we said, it's already inside of you. So no matter what happens, that success is within you, and it will just always replenish and repay itself back. So yeah, it's not just a first step thing. It's something that will be with you forever in business.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because you always have contrasting experiences. I always say like 50% of the time you're gonna kind of feel like us. Like it's 50% of the time it's gonna feel
Yeah.
like shit. That doesn't mean you gotta get bad and feel bad about it. Just accept the fact that 50% of the time something isn't gonna be rainbows and sunshine. So it's like I need to be able to know how to handle that, right? And I think people often interpret that piece as resilience.
Yeah.
But what I like to think of it more as like, I don't know if you ever heard of like anti-fragile and like that whole piece with, no, okay. So Nicholas Taleb is the author, but he wrote this book called Anti-Fragile. And the idea is like, things that are rigid after a certain amount of time will break. The opposite of that, or like the next level of that, isn't necessarily something that's robust or resilient, right? Because that also has like a endpoint, but it's like what's actually the opposite of fragile? It's not robust or resilient. It's actually, he coined it, anti-fragile, something that gets stronger the more stress that you put onto it, right? So this whole sentiment of starting with the inner work first, knowing that whatever happens, I will be okay because I have the necessary skill set that's evidenced by the things that I do, that I can bounce back from setbacks, that I know how to manage my thoughts. My emotions don't scare me and cripple me. I don't get into doom loops.
Yeah.
Now I can handle whatever it is that happens, right? Sickness, other circumstances, right? Like you hit 10K, now I'm going into, I got to make a team. Welcome to a whole new set of problems, right? That's going to come from like that, and or like scaling issues, right? Like they are very real problems that can elicit the same stresses of like, oh crap, I don't have money because I got to pay my team, I got to pay for ads, I got to do all this stuff. you can still be left broke, right? And it very much that's how my first business imploded,
Yeah.
right? Because I wasn't as attuned to these things. So yeah, that sentiment of these skills are going to carry you through everything because they make you more anti-fragile, I think is such a key part that so many people miss. So thank you for resonating that. Well,
Yes.
okay, anything to add before we go to the next question?
I don't think so.
Okay, so my next question was like, okay, so that's kind of the advice for somebody who, let's just say, starting out or is in that early stage. And then you kind of have this like middle mark where generally the way that I see it manifest is, maybe I've hit a few 10K months, but it's not really stable. There's this kind of feast and famine bit happening. Okay, so now I have traction, I'm doing things, I've done some of the inner work, I have evidence of it, but I can't seem to break that plateau, right? What's your advice for something like that?
Yeah, so I would say there's two parts to this. And I would say the first part is, again, and I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but I would say just really inspecting. Am I ready to take it to the next level? Like, is there anything heisting? Am I heisting myself? Am I hijacking myself in any way? Like, is there something going on? And the answer might be yes, the answer might be no, because what I found is that every big milestone that we hit, it's kind of like you have to like reassess and re-get your bearings. And you're like, okay, next one, here we go. And so it's just checking in with, okay, I know what the next step is, but am I ready for it? So again, just doing that inner work. And then I would say that's the time to say, okay, I want 25K months. How does that person show up? Like what do they charge? You have to start thinking about logistically, really, what do they do? How much am I charging my clients then if I'm making that much? How much? Because I think that sometimes when we've been at a certain level for long enough, if you don't take the next step, that actually kind of can sometimes hinder you, because it's like being ready and you have all of this momentum behind you and you don't go anywhere. So you just kind of start floundering with the energy back and forth. So if you're ready and you haven't taken the next step, that's the time to really like sit down and say, I say, who is she? Who is this wealthy woman? What does she charge? How does she go up? How does she feel? What are her income like? What is her income like? I write it down on paper. Like, this is manifesting, right? Is, manifesting, I used to think of as creating, but then I looked into the definition, like in Webster's dictionary, and it's actually to match. To manifest is to match. And so I was like, oh, sure, we're creating, but also we're matching. So what that really, even just talking about it excites me, because what that means is that potential that's in the quantum field, that potential that's already in our universe, all we have to do, all quote, heavy air quotes, all we have to do when we're taking it to the next level is to match it. And to match it, you have to know what you're matching. How do I feel? How do I show up? What am I getting? What am I paying for? How much am I charging clients? How many clients do I have a week? And just, not putting so much attachment on it that you're like, I need this many clients. But this is actually what I wrote to you in when I was talking about what I wanted to talk about. It's knowing. So when I was afraid, I would kind of just be like, I think some clients are going to come to me. And I didn't know how much I would have to make. I didn't know how many clients I had to have. I didn't know what was in my bank account. So I would say to take it to the next level, you always just have to know. Like, know what the next level is, so inside and out that you literally become it.
Love it. Again, I had that visual of another. Again, I'm going to butcher the actual Zen quote, but it's like that idea of like after enlightenment, go get water. Right? It's like after you reach this like ultimate Zen heightened, idyllic state,
Yeah.
just go back to doing what you were doing before. Go back to doing the thing that worked, right? And
Yeah.
and when, because I pretty much talk about the same stuff, but you put it so eloquently, which is like, okay, so you're starting out, your biggest quarrel is going to be the stuckness that comes from not being able to self-regulate. So again, managing your thoughts, managing your feelings, self-coaching through it, focusing on doing enough of the things that, like the one or two things that really are going to work.
Yeah.
Right now, next level becomes, okay, I have all the pieces in place, like you said, to be stable here. And if you're even like, if you imagine a river, right? Like if you don't at least swim part of the way, like eventually you're going to get pushed to the edge and you end up on the shore versus continuing going down the river, right? So there is some kind of manual swimming involved. And to me, that next step, and I agree with you, is okay, I can self-regulate here. I don't have to freak out. I can be grounded. I can be rooted in like more of who I am. But to make the space for the new to come in, I have to create that capacity internally,
Mhm.
right? Like be as familiar with it as like if I asked you, okay, how are you going to go drive somewhere? You're like, well, I'm getting the car. I'm going to take a right here and go there. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you have to be that tactily aware of it, right? And I don't think it's necessarily the same for everybody. Like if you aren't really like a fan of like full on visualization, I can smell, touch, etc. Cool,
Yeah.
but like can you embody whatever that is? Can you understand what it takes to get there? Like, say, can I understand what do I need to charge? How many people need to work with? If I were to scale this to 100 clients, how would I do that? What would that look like? Would I be happy with a team, smaller team? Like, then you get into all of these things, and whatever your process is to get to that, I think is relevant because it's your process. So, yeah, again, anything else you wanted to add to that piece?
And I would think the most tangible thing to add to that would be the way that you know that you're stepping into the next version of yourself is if you're taking the action that you just figured out you needed to take, right? So if you're like, okay, I'm going to have this $25,000 month and that's going to be my next consistent, are you doing the things that you figured out you had to do? And if you're not, that's the time to be like, okay, is there something coming up? Or are you just being like, hey, this is how much I charge now? Or to your new client, just saying, this is how much I charge now. And it's a different, much higher usually number, and you can just send it out. So I would say the most tangible thing to focus on with that is there is that work, there is the knowing, and then are you taking the action? And if you're not taking the action, you didn't do the previous two steps enough. And if you are taking the action, then things will start to flow, and just keep taking that action. And again, I think that I know it seems simplistic, but what I found is really the first two, the knowing and the self work. If the third step of action isn't getting you the results you want, it's usually because there's just some more work to do in there. But if you're taking the action, then you're there. Yeah.
Absolutely, I agree. And what I would then like to go into, so like another element of that that comes up often is, so I want to know, like I want to do the next step. I'm ready. I can like self-regulate, have like evidence that the basics are more or less in place.
Yeah.
But now you're at this place of like, okay, I'm kind of doing the thing. It's kind of working. And I'm kind of doing this other thing and it's also kind of working. Like, how do I know what thing to really focus on so that I can really get that traction that's really going to move me forward?
This for me personally is where meditation and spirituality come in. So if I have done the thinking, if I have done the human stuff, right, I've done everything that seems logically and analytically correct, that's when I step back and I go into meditation and I ask for clarity, or I clear my mind. Because so again, when you think of brainwaves, if I've been in this analytical, logistical way of thinking, I've got to come down to the lower brainwaves where my intuition lives. So after I've taken those action steps, or I've done the things, or I've done the inner work, I will come back down again after, and I will just always go to meditation for clarity, because that's where that higher self that you were talking about, that higher container, that's where I access that, not from thinking. So I'll go in, and that's where I usually get either the keep going, keep doing what you're doing, or I'll have a random thought that I never would have in the day to day been able to come up with, because our creative side again is kind of in this lower frequency, this like chill, fluid, more feminine vibe. And so I come down into that when things are starting to work, and they might be or they might not be. I'll come down, and sometimes I'll sit down and I literally out loud will be like, what's up, universe? Like, spirit guides, hello, I love you, hi, I am doing my best. Is there anything that you would like me to know? And I open myself up to what needs to be done. Like when I came up with, or when I got the message of corporate mindfulness. So I was coaching individuals for a really long time. And then I realized I want to take it to the next level. How do I do that? So I sat down and I was like, universe, I'm ready to take it to like the next damn level. And that's when it came to me, corporate mindfulness coaching. And that wasn't in my personality's awareness. That kind of money wasn't in my experience. And yet it came in, and I was like, okay. So again, sometimes it'll be something new, maybe, or it'll just be the clarity you need to keep going and keep self-regulating. And also when you come down, it gives you the space to like get back into your joy with it, because I think that that's something that we totally have to touch upon, is like, this is supposed to be fun. That's why we're not in the other jobs. That's why we're working for ourselves. So sure, we're going to have some days where we're like, wow, why did I do this to myself? But ultimately, like, you want to be able to come out of the meditation, put on a song you love, and get into that vibration and keep going. So that was a really long-winded way of me saying that's when I meditate and ask for guidance.
Right. So we just go back right to the beginning. Like, yeah, just re-listen to what we said,
Yes,
what we said at the beginning.
totally.
And yeah, I mean, my favorite part of this, it's like, is that sentiment of like, it's not sexy till it is.
Yeah.
Right? Like it'd be a lot more exciting if we could talk about this, like, framework and like, all
Plan.
this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. This plan, do X, Y, Z, ABC. But ultimately it is a disservice. Why? Because it always comes back to the same thing. And that's why I included like why I stress like the focus management aspect. And the way that I would describe it, it's like, okay, if I take the time to make a passive decision, and what I would just like what you just described with you guys, okay, I take a step back, I tune in, I figure out what that is, I make it into a goal. Like, that is a passive decision. And generally goals, commitments, etc., they are passive decisions, right? That passive decision needs to be supported by active decisions, moment to moment, day to day, second by second, that ultimately support that passive decision, right? And this is assuming that the passive decision is from a pure place, you have the full clarity for it. But now it comes down to, like, focus is collecting evidence of those active decisions, right? So when it comes to these things, it's like, okay, I can observe and I take a look at, okay, what am I doing?
Mhm.
Does it align with what I said I wanted?
Yeah.
If the answer is no, okay, so now we go back to managing your thoughts, managing your feelings, sitting with yourself. Okay, now we repeat the loop. Okay, under these constraints now, am I making enough active decisions to see the evidence of it? Yes. Okay, cool. Then just keep going, right?
Yeah.
Because distraction and shiny object syndrome and diluting my focus, like, it's really just another aspect of saying, I am not staying committed to what I said. Like, the self-trust isn't there, or the constraints aren't in place to keep that. Like, if you need accountability, cool, is that in place? Like, because that's what's motivating for you, right? So I love that element of, like, at the end of the day, it really just comes down to you going back to exactly what ended up working the first time to move you to this position, right? The mechanics change from level to level. Yeah, you can deal with different things, cool. But who you are, how you work with yourself, like, you're the one that made it. You're the one that has to continue with it. So again, anything to add to that piece?
Yeah, I would say two things that made me think of is, one, usually, like, so at the end of the month, I will meditate, and I'll feel into the priorities for the next month. So like yesterday, I sat and meditated and felt into what I needed to do. And in my agenda, I wrote down the goals, the personal, the health, the financial, the business goals. And so you make it reasonable and you just have that as an outline. So there are those things that I am doing and I know when to do them. Like, I'm training for a marathon. If I wasn't running, that would kind of suck. Like, so yeah, there are these things that you have to do. And so I usually tune into, okay, where am I at right now? And what are the things I have to do for, as an entrepreneur, sometimes, often you have many different facets of your business. You have group coaching, you have a podcast, you have all of these different facets. So I would say sitting down and writing them down for me is very helpful, because if you have at least a general outline, I like to be kind of specific, but then when the day comes, you're not sitting around always saying, like, what am I going to do? So yes, it's like this balance of room for something to come in and meditation, and a foundation of things that I've written out for myself when I was in a really high vibration place with my goals. And then I would say that the other thing that's important about meditation is, when we're taking the next step, it's usually something we have not experienced in this life before. So most of us will have never made 25,000, 50,000, however much you're trying to make in a month before. And so the mind that knows all of its past doesn't know the feelings, the emotions, the actions, the things that will need to be put into place. So when you go into meditation, it's important because it takes you out of your personality now, and it allows you to connect to that part of you that is that person. So again, it's like kind of coming out of that ego that we were talking about, connecting to the higher self, and also connecting to the field, like this quantum field of potential. And then when you come out, you feel like that person. So I know we touched upon it a little bit, but that's the reason that I personally really like meditation, is because often the personality that knows what you've done isn't going to quite know how to do and feel what you want. So that's why, or taking that 10 minutes of silence and just sitting, and then feeling into, okay, I've done that 10 minutes, and now I'm going to feel like, what does it feel like? So yeah, just getting yourself into the vibration of that place.
100%. And, I always use the example of like in reference to, okay, if, you're at $1,000 a month, it's like, okay, well, I've never made 10K. I need to kind of do and be a different version of myself to make that happen. How do I do that? It seems so crazy. I'm like, just think back to like, when you were so devastated that like your high school sweetheart like broke up with you, or that didn't work out, and it was like the end of the world. Like I'm never gonna get over this. It's the biggest disaster in my life. But like you look back on it now, it's like, whatever, man. Like it happened. Like it's not
Yeah.
that big a deal,
Yeah.
right? It's gonna be like the same path going forward. But again, right, you from that vantage point when you're devastated, yeah, I agree. You're not really gonna know what you're gonna be like at 30 or whatever,
Yeah.
right? But I think that always roots people in like, oh yeah, that's true. I was so like silly back then. That's because I know what I know now. So it's like, could I have at that point calmed a little, try to tune into whatever version of myself that I could and made that better? That's the requirement on the business side of things. So love that. So I have one more question for you before we're going to start to just wrap this up. So one thing that often happens, because I do work with heart center entrepreneurs, and a lot of them are healers, a lot of them are intuitives, and there's often this sentiment of like disempowerment that shows up with that, right? Like we can only be okay when other people are okay, others before myself. Like again, the strength that makes them a healer is the first distortion that's going to occur. And what I find oftentimes, and this has been both true on the, so when we're talking about like coaching, so as a coach, I've gotten into those traps where like you're trying to heal somebody that, isn't ready to be healed, or, rescue them or whatever. And then on the receiving end, where I was buying into courses and coaching, etc., for a long time, where I was unintentionally and unconsciously looking for them to rescue me, right? Like if I can only buy this thing, I'm going to do the work, this will be my rescue, then I'll be worthy enough to actually like make the thing, right? But the reality is like there's nobody, like nobody's here to save you, like we are here to actually save ourselves. So I'm, I guess, approaching this from the context of like I see you working with very similar individuals, maybe in the past, maybe not corporate, I don't know, and or it might have shown up in your own life as well. So my question is, the sentiment of like rescuing, like how is that something that we can separate from or work through, both on if I'm considering getting coaching and if I am a coach or healer myself?
Yeah. So I would say that as a coach, just if you find yourself saying like, I'm rescuing these people, you've got to change the narrative. So just knowing that, just like anything else, you are a tool to help them on their journey, but you're not the end all be all. And so just knowing like what I say, they will take what they need and they will leave the rest. Like I've had people pay good money, sign up with me, have one session and never show up again. And you can check in with them, but ultimately it's not on you. It's not on you. That's really, you have to let's just be blatant. It's not on you to do their work for them. So they're going to either pay the money and show up, or they're going to pay the money and they're not. And I've been the person who's paid the money and then been like, actually, I am not ready for this. So as the coach, I would say, knowing that you're not rescuing, you're just an ally and you're just someone who is going to help them on their journey, but you're not, again, this end all be all. And also I think that boundaries are very important. So I know that's something that a lot of coaches do now, and I wouldn't do this because I like can't be on my phone that much. I am on my phone a good amount, but I know that Voxer is becoming very popular for coaches to opt for Voxer. So they'll say, I'm available on Voxer 24/7, which is, if you don't know what Voxer is, it's essentially a walkie-talkie where someone can message you a message and then you can message back. Or if you happen to tune in, you can hear them live. And so, I had a client who's a coach and she would say, my client is blowing up my spot. And I was like, okay, so this is where a boundary has to come in. You have to say, maybe you have to change your policy where I will answer in 72 hours instead of 24 hours, or I will get back to you as soon as I can. Or you have to feel into, is that something that's aiding you and aiding your clients? You have to just start to know these boundaries, because sure, you're someone who's helping them, and you have got to have a firm boundary as a coach. You have to, or there's going to be just a lot of unnecessary residual emotional stuff that will happen. And I've never really come into too much contact with that, because like I said, it's just having that boundary and knowing, like, in this, I am the person who you're coming to, and the session ends and that's it. Like, sure, we can message and we can be friends outside, or we can be like, we can be in contact on Instagram or whatever, but there is a boundary and it is clear. Like, you have to make it clear. And on the other side of that, when you think about it from a client standpoint, you really respect your coach that much more when you know the boundaries, and you feel better when there's a boundary between you and this person who is giving you the advice, because ultimately you're paying a professional to help you. And so when there is the boundary of, that is my coach, we go into a session and we leave, even if you talk outside of it, that boundary is, that's it. So I would just say that I can't stress enough about, like, boundaries and being firm. Like, I'm all about spirituality and love and everything, but that doesn't mean that you have to just take on someone's emotions and take on stuff. Like, if someone's coming at you with a lot, you put up a boundary, you put up a wall. Like, it's like that saying, you on the airplane, you have to put the air mask on yourself first before you put someone else on. So if you're letting your energy be flagrantly taken, or like giving it to everyone all the time, that's going to serve no one, including your clients. And so on the other side of it, like I said, being a client, you respect when a coach is powerful enough to have boundaries. So
100%, right? And
yeah.
I agree with you. Boundaries are such a key thing, especially to heart-centered entrepreneurs and healers, because usually there's a lot of core wounding, and boundaries oftentimes like come up with regards to that. And what I just add is, the tricky thing about boundaries is, like, we are both responsible for drawing out like what's in bounds and what's not. And we also need to be the referee of that. Because
Yeah.
sometimes we'll get like, oh yeah, like I told them, but like they don't respect it. It's like, well, do you respect the boundaries?
Yeah.
Right. So like, I think that is a key part that's usually missing, is you also have to practice being the referee. So then going back to how I'm managing my emotions, how I'm managing the resistance that comes up when I do that. And I think the other part too, to add to the coaching aspect, like when the rescuing bit comes up, is like, and I initially learned this in nutrition, but it's this idea of caring units. So if I have somebody in front of me and they're like, okay, like, and that is, it was like, I want to lose weight. Cool. How bad do you want to lose weight? I'm like a 9 out of 10. I want to lose like 30 pounds. Like, I'm in it. Cool. When I look at their actions are kind of like a 4 or 5 out of 10. So let's just say a 5 out of 10. Okay, so they say they want this, but how much care units they put into it is what a 5 out of 10. Me as a coach, I can't put more than 4 out of 10 caring units into their success. Otherwise, I'm at a loss, right? So if I put 6, I'm at a direct deficit. If I put a 5, I'm at a risk of cons, because they're going to fluctuate back and forth. I'm at a risk even then of like wanting it more than they want it themselves. So to ensure that I don't walk away with a deficit, I have to put in 1 less than them, right? And that was always like, like, yeah, that's true. Like, why am I killing myself over this person that like doesn't want it? Meanwhile, the client have to check in like once a month, they're killing it. Like, why not check in with them twice? We'll kill it twice as fast, So yeah, that sentiment I think is totally good. So yeah, any other points to add to that whole piece?
I love that. I've never consciously thought about it like that, but I like that. And I also think that what you just explained helps you to have not an emotional attachment. So when coaching, like you said, there's a fine line. I care about every single one of my clients deeply, but there's no emotional attachment. And what I learned early on in coaching is that when you know your worth, you're not so inclined to be like, do they like me? Was that a good session? Did I give enough? And that care units is actually a really good way for people to tangibly be like, okay, I'm doing enough. And the only thing that I want to add is every client is going to be different. So some clients, sure, I have a client and our session is amazing. And it's my client I've been working with for 4 years and we go over by 10 minutes. Like that will happen. And that feels very aligned. And she still knows the boundaries and it's still all good. And so just knowing like there will be times where like things will happen or, someone doesn't show up, but they make sure to reschedule and everyone is going to be different. But just knowing that, yeah, I like the care units thing. I'm gonna start thinking about that.
Awesome. Well, what
Yeah.
I'll take the wording on the manifestation because I actually didn't know that the thing was like matching. So
Yeah.
yeah, in that case, very fair exchange as far as I'm concerned. It's all good.
Good.
Yeah. So listen, thank you very much. So be conscious of time, but that was a super cool conversation. So thank you very much for coming on and sharing all of your wisdom and bouncing back and forth. And yeah, I'm so happy for a lot of the pieces that not saying we're like reaffirmation of like what I'm doing, but it's just cool to essentially hear the same thing in a different voice through a different lens through a different experience. And sometimes that's how we learn best, right? Like I could say it to somebody, but then somebody else says the same thing in their voice, like, oh yeah, I get it now. So I thank you for that piece, and I love the fact that we managed to do this. So before we close this off, floor is yours on how people can find you, who's the people that you work with, where can they find you, all that good stuff.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm on Instagram at Casey_Edward. I'm on my stories quite a lot. So that's probably the best way to interact with me. And then I have a podcast, like you mentioned, it's called I Can't Wait to Tell You. You can find it everywhere that podcasts are: Apple, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher. And then right now, what I'm doing is I brought mindfulness into corporations, small businesses, kind of pretty much any business that is like, oh, mindfulness is going to actually help my team be more productive. So that's what I'm working on right now. And you can go to my website for more information on that, which is just CaseyEdward.com. So everything's my name.
Awesome. Love it. Yeah, and we'll put all of that in the show notes. So thank you very much for coming on. And for everybody else, we'll see you on the next one.